Hi, it's Lauren. Welcome back to my craft room. I'm thankful to have you here today. It is the first of the month, which means pretty soon you'll be able to get the latest clear stamp of the month from Spellbinders. I do receive the stamp set and dies a little early, so I have them in some non-traditional packaging. But let's stamp out this new stamp set and check out the dies so you can see how to use this stamp set. I'm also going to show you how it looks colored in with alcohol markers as well as watercolor, and then a couple card ideas just for some inspiration for you to use this new stamp set. But of course, make sure you're checking out other Instagram, social media, and Spellbinders to see how you can create some fun cards with this beautiful large floral stamp set. So since this is a new stamp, I'm just grabbing an eraser and just completely wiping the stamp set with my eraser, or the different stamps, I should say. Sometimes they have coatings on them from production, and I just want to make sure I get some nice stamping before for the first time stamping it. So I want to make sure any of that residue or coating is gone. First, I'm going to stamp in my Onyx Black ink from Sassy Club, which I use for alcohol marker coloring. I stamped my image twice, and then I did all of the sentiments just so I could have them on hand. I won't use them all for these cards, but I love having sentiments ready to go. Next, I grabbed some watercolor cardstock, and I'm just going to stamp my image twice, this time using VersaFine in Onyx Black, and I will use a clear embossing powder to emboss my image. Again, I'm doing it twice because there is a really cool feature from the dies for this stamp set this month. So now that everything is stamped out, let's get out the dies. There is a large die that completely goes around the full floral image. And then there are two smaller dies that cut out just two of the smaller kind of sections of these flowers. I have these two larger petal flowers with leaves, and then a smaller flower with a leaf and stem in the lower left hand corner. And of course, we have our label that will die cut around the larger sentiments inside of the label, and then a die cut for the hello you, as that is a smaller sentiment. I love that there is an individual die for that, since it is kind of small to be inside such a large label stamp and die cut. So I'm running this through my Spellbinders Black P6. This is the collaboration die cutting machine with scrapbook.com. And let's see how well this cuts. I have my magic mat and then the normal, layout, or not layout, but platform setup for die cutting. So here are the two smaller flowers cut out, and as you can see that when you die cut them out, it's not really like the prettiest thing ever of the images that are left over, but you could still definitely use that, just kind of trim around the image just a little closer than the spacing that the die gives the image. But yeah, I'm not going to use it for the purposes of today's video, but you can definitely save them for another project. So I die cut my large images out of the alcohol friendly paper as well as the watercolor paper, and then I did all of the sentiments just once to have them in either on these projects or to save for future projects. So I'm going to zoom in here and show you my coloring. I will do my quick cuts between colors just to save some time, and I'm not going to show how I colored in every single part of this image. This is already a long video and I didn't want to keep you here too much longer. So I'm using GYs for my greens. I have the Fern cardstock pack from Spellbinders, and I thought this color combination looked really nice with that green, so I'll be using that cardstock on my projects today. So I started off with a darker color, which was GY42, and then I went to GY8 as my midtone and GY5 as my lightest. And I did miss a few leaves here and there while I'm coloring, but I will go back and color them in as I find them. So after my greens, I'm going to grab my violet to color in some purple. The darker tone is V160, and I'm only doing two tones for my violet. Most of these flowers are pretty small, so just two tones is fine. So the second color I will get will be V020, and I will color in all of those purple flowers. I really liked the kind of lighter purple for these cards because I'm also going to be bringing in some pink and yellow for the rest of my flowers. So the pink, I again am doing only 2 shades. I probably could have done 3 because these flowers are larger. And I started with R200 as the darker shade, and I'm doing, much more of a brush stroke because it is a larger petal to color. And then I use the lighter tone R23 to finish coloring in the pink flower. And I really love this color combination. I think it looks so pretty. I'm going to be coloring in these smaller flowers. They kind of reminded me of like blue, like I think bellflower flowers. So I started with B350 as the darker color and then B340 as the lighter tone. For the insides of my flowers, I'm using YR33 and YR170. For my yellow flowers, I'm using 2 colors again, Y1 and Y3, and then I'll bring in that YR170 to color in the center of those flowers as well. And that will finish up the coloring of these images. Now I didn't get a perfect stamp in a section, so I'm just grabbing a black alcohol marker friendly pen and adding in some more of that image, just kind of fixing a couple spots. And then I also went out of the lines in a couple areas, so I'm grabbing a white gel pen and just covering any times I went outside the line. So here is a close-up of how these look with alcohol markers. I think they turned out really pretty and I'm loving the colors that I chose. I hope you'll find some inspiration for coloring in your images with alcohol markers. But let's jump over into watercolors. I'm using my Tim Holtz Distress watercolor pencils, and I'm going to do the same color scheme, but with my watercolor pencil colors instead. So I have peeled paint, and I'm going to be coloring in all of the green with this color. So all of my leaves and little, I guess they're all leaves. I'm like little flourishes, but those are leaves as well in peeled paint. I'm doing tumbled glass for the blue, those little kind of hanging blue flowers. I don't really know what kind of flowers any of these are, so I just went with what colors I thought would be pretty. And then for the pink flowers, I'm using picked raspberry, but it's a little purpley pink than I would want. So I'm going to bring in tattered rose as well and just try to kind of, I don't know, want to say peach it up a bit, but just add a little bit of that orange pink color to the bottom of the flowers. I don't feel like it's really noticeable here on camera, but in person it does have a little bit more of like a two-toned look to the flower where it's a little more peachier at the base. For the centers of all of my flowers, I'm using wild honey, and then my yellow of my flowers is mustard seed. So coloring those in. I'm not really doing a lot of detailed coloring. I'm not going back and adding more color. I just wanted to go for watercolor, and I'm relying on the image and the texture on the image to be the details. So no shading really. And then finally for the purple flowers, I am using shaded lilac, which I found really interesting that it looks so blue in the pencil. And it definitely looks a little more bluer than I was going for in my head, but I still thought it was really pretty, so I kept coloring. And here's what they look like with the Tim Holtz Distress watercolor pencils. So now that we're all done coloring, let's get into card making. I have the 3D embossing folder called Flower Frenzy, and I grabbed some of that fern cardstock and I spritzed it with some water because I have never used this 3D folder before, and I wanted to make sure I didn't have any tearing. And I know that water can help with embossing, water on the paper, just a light mist, just to help it really be able to get that a good impression without any tearing or ripping. And I think it turned out really cool. I love the texture on this. Now, I don't use embossing folders a lot in my crafting, which I don't know why. I think I just don't grab them as much as I used to, and so I kind of forget how many I have. But I think this turned out really pretty, and I love that it's a 3D embossing, so it's got some real good texture to it. And I decided that I wanted to use my watercolor image on this. And so I grabbed the You're a Wonderful Friend sentiment, but it's on a really white piece of cardstock. And my watercolor cardstock is a little bit off-white, as I think a lot of watercolor cardstocks are. So I grabbed a sheet of alabaster, and I'm going to restamp another sentiment and do some embossing on that alabaster cardstock because I think it matches the watercolor cardstock a little better. I also cut a layer of some yellow, this is chamomile cardstock from Spellbinders, and I just thought it matched really well with the yellows in the flowers. So I'm going to be doing some embossing, like I said, of the sentiment. I'm going to spare you from watching me stamp and emboss. So I did the frame in a rose gold embossing powder, and then I stamped my sentiment in that same VersaFine black ink, and then used clear embossing powder to have a nice bright sentiment on that alabaster cardstock. And I think that just looks a little better. It's not so stark white on against the rest of the card. I wanted to add a little bit of rose gold just to bring out more of that pink. So I grabbed my lunar paste. This is from Ranger Ink and Simon Hurley Create, and this is Rosy Cheeks. It's a new lunar paste color, and it's so pretty. And I'm just going along the edges of my green background. Just to add a little bit of pink again and some shine to the card. So I'm going to set that aside to dry while I work on my card base. So I'm gluing that chamomile A2 piece of cardstock to my card base, and I didn't get it perfectly centered, but that's okay. I'm just grabbing some large scissors and trimming down the exposed part of the white card base. And then my fern piece, which is 4 by 5 1/4, so there's a bit of a border. I wanted to pop it up on my background. And when I have really large pieces like this, I like to use craft foam because it's cheaper than double-sided adhesive foam. I added some strong sticky tape, but also some wet glue because there's a lot of texture on my embossed piece of cardstock, and I wanted to make sure it really gripped onto that piece. So I have both types of adhesive there, and then I glued it to the center of that yellow cardstock piece on my card base. To attach my flowers, I'm going to grab my 1/8 of an inch foam adhesive strips. These are from scrapbook.com, and they fit just right behind the flower stem. So I'm going to add a bunch of foam of that 1/8 side coming up the, the different stems of the flowers. And then I cut a piece of my 2-inch foam adhesive to fill in the rest of the, behind my flowers to pop it up onto my card base. And I centered it, I wanted to say landscape, but that's not right. I centered it horizontally and then a little off center vertically because my sentiment will be glued just under the flowers. So I added foam adhesive and some wet glue where it will overlap my stamped image, and then gluing that as centered as I can onto my card base, just overlapping the flower stems just a bit. And this image really takes up a lot on the card, so I don't feel like you really need to do a whole lot with this stamped image. I think having the embossed background just elevates the florals a lot and lets you have a busier background without it overtaking the image. With it being too busy. I added a few pearls that I thought just would match really well with that alabaster color from the sentiment, and I added them to the center of some of the flowers in the embossed background, and that will finish off this card. So very simple card, just really wanted to show off those watercolor flowers. For my second card that I'm going to use with my alcohol marker colored in image, I'm going to do a little bit of foiling. I have the Geometric Optical Background Glimmer Hot Foil Plate, and it measures 4.5 by 5 3/4. So I'm going to cut a piece of white cardstock. This is, I believe, by Hammer and Mill. It's Hammer Mill? Is it Hammer and Mill or Hammer Mill? Now I'm It's behind me, so I don't know the name of it, but I will have it in my basic supply list if you want to check out what kind of cardstock I'm using for hot foiling. It's based off of recommendations from fellow crafters like Justin and Carrie Rhodes. So definitely not something I figured out by myself. I lean on my crafty friends to guide me when I need help. And I trimmed a piece of silver foil, and I'll go ahead and run that through my Glimmer Hot Foil machine, and look at how beautiful this turned out. There's a little bit of overfoiling in the corners, but that's why I cut a large piece, because I can always trim it down and I don't have to worry about it. I also have the matching layered geometric optical stencils, and I think I have a prototype because there is one part of my stencil missing, but that's not a big deal. I'll just shift it over and fill in the spot that should be cut out, but it's not. So the first layer of this stencil, I'm going to be using worn lipstick Distress Oxide. Oh, that was a tongue twister. The second layer is spun sugar. So I want my largest, I guess the square pieces to be pink. And then I wanted purple to really shine through. So I grabbed milled lavender, and those are the circles. And then the little squares and diamonds are scattered straw to bring in the yellow. So I'm trying to use colors that I think would match really well with my image, which I think it turned out really nice. I'm so happy. I don't know if you saw my jazz hands there, but I'm really loving it. I'm going to trim this background to be 4 by 5 1/4. So I'm doing my best to center the design as best as possible. It doesn't matter, but I wanted it to look even on all 4 sides. And I have an old large die of the month from way back when that cuts out these really pretty geometrical frames. So I don't think this die is available anywhere, so I'm so sorry for using something that you may not be able to get, but just grab any type of frame, or you could use thread. I'm just trying to create a little bit of something to break up the background between my stamped image and that geometric design. You'll see in a minute what I mean. I'm going through my sentiments and figuring out what I want to use. I was thinking of using Hello You, but I was afraid it would get lost because my background is very busy and so is my image. So I'm grabbing the Happy Birthday to You sentiment that I die cut out earlier, because I think this would be a really pretty birthday card or Mother's Day card, which is what I probably should have done. But I think it looks really pretty, and I wanted to add in some of those extra flowers on this one. So I have that little yellow flower that I also stamped and die cut out separately that I think will look really pretty in layering in that sentiment. And there you can kind of see what I'm thinking with those frame pieces. So I'm starting with gluing my hot foiled and stenciled background to some A2 of that fern green cardstock. Next, I want to add in those pieces of chamomile using the frame from the geometrical floral frames, which was an old die set of the month. And I'm just adding it into the top right hand and bottom lower corners. I cut it in half, as you can see, so I could make the frame a little bit bigger than the stamped image because it is such a large stamped image. And then I'm going to do the exact same thing as I did for my watercolor. So adding in those strips where the stems are, and then some large foam adhesive to fill in the back. And I'm going to glue that to my card base. So as you can see, those frames are just kind of sticking out, adding a little bit more texture and interest in breaking up, something in between that busy background and my busy floral image. And then finally, I added my sentiment the same way I did my last card. And then I'm repeating that process for my little yellow flower. So a little piece of foam where it will attach to the card base, and then wet glue where it will overlap. So that will finish off this card. Of course, I need to add some more of those pearls again. So I will grab a few of those and place them around the florals. I did them inside of the chamomile frame, so they're still kind of like in the frame with the flowers, but obviously embellish to your heart's content however you would like. And that will finish off the card. So I'll go ahead and add it to a card base off camera. But I still had those extra flowers that I wanted to use. So I'm going to grab my wet glue and I will add them to the inside of the card. So I'll start with my watercolor one. I have 2 floral images left over, so I decided to put them in the lower right hand corner, just kind of layering them very simply to add a little bit on the inside of the card. I didn't stamp any sentiments on the inside, but I think just adding this little touch will be nice for now until I decide who I'm going to give this to, and then I'll pick a sentiment to go inside. And then for the alcohol colored card, I'm gluing the single flower I have left to the top center. So that way my sentiment will go underneath it. Just using my grid mat to help me center that as best as possible, but pretty little flower on the inside of the card. So let's take a close-up look at how these cards turned out. I'm going to start here with my watercolor with that 3D embossed background. I think this image is so pretty, and I love that you can die cut out 2 of the florals to create, maybe you could do a wreath or another card with them. And then here is my alcohol marker colored an image with the hot foil and stenciled background. But I hope you love this new stamp set as much as I do and you find some inspiration from this video. Don't forget that you can get this kit starting April 6th if you are not already a kit subscriber. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you'll click like, and if you're new here, I hope you'll subscribe and come back. As always, you can find everything I use down below in the description box. Thank you and have a wonderful day. Bye!